Hello and welcome. You're watching the Newsroom. Breaking this hour, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited troops fighting in the southeastern Zaporizhzhia front line. He shared a short video from a bunker with a serviceman, saying that they discussed key decisions to strengthen defenses, including staffing and equipment needs. The visit comes as Ukraine military reports worsening conditions in the area, with Russian forces stepping up their offensive. Now moving on to China. China will remain committed to openness and cooperation in global agriculture, state spokesperson in ministry regarding the country's soybean trade with the United States. The Chinese spokesperson He Deng stated that the China-US Chinese Customs has announced that it would lift a suspension on soybean imports from 3 U.S. companies, including CHS Inc. This decision, which came into effect on November 10th, follows an assessment of the corrective measures taken by the U.S. side. In addition, China's export controls on rare earth elements were defended by He Yadong. He has stated that the controls align with China's laws and regulations, and they aim to protect national security and global supply chain stability. Now moving on, Britain has selected Wilfa in North Wales for its first small nuclear power station, angering the United States. The US had pushed UK for a large US-led plant in the area, but Britain opted for a smaller British-designed modular reactor. The decision to build small modular reactors is part of the Ukraine strategy to quickly boost energy security and meet climate goals. Rolls-Royce will lead the design. The US criticized the move, saying it would not lower electricity prices or quickly deliver power. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has defended the UK's choice, calling Wilfa the best site for SMRs, and it will create 3,000 local jobs. The UK government is still exploring other sites for a large-scale nuclear plant by 2026. This is what Keir Starmer has stated.
This is the biggest announcement in North Wales for a generation. It's a small modular reactor at Wilfa in North Wales. That will be 3,000 jobs, and we start next year. And that's partnering with Rolls-Royce, so hugely important. But alongside that, there's another announcement, which is the AI growth zone, which is going to be here in North Wales as well. The two will go together. That's another 3,500 jobs. And it's fantastic to be at this college. These are 16 to 19-year-olds whose future will be in these projects. So a really important.
Now we move on to France. France has marked 10 years since the November 13 terror attacks that killed 130 people in Paris, the deadliest assault on French soil since World War II. President Emmanuel Macron led tributes alongside survivors and families of the victims, laying wreaths and observing moments for silence at the attack sites. The Eiffel Tower was lit in the colors of the French flag, and church bells tolled across Paris in remembrance of what the Archbishop called a long night of anguish. Mourners laid flowers and candles at the foot of the Marianne statue, a national symbol of liberty and unity. The wound is still there, and said one attendee, while another stressed that the importance of remembering how the nation came together in the face of tragedy. The commemorations continue across Paris, marking a decade since the deadliest attacks in French soil since World War II. Let's in fact listen into what some of the mourners have shared.
Et moi, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, c'est surtout qu'on s'identifie beaucoup en fait aux victimes, dans le sens où le Bataclan, c'est un lieu qu'on fréquente. Les terrasses où ça a eu lieu, c'est des terrasses qu'on fréquente aussi. Moi, je suis parisienne depuis toujours, donc j'ai vraiment, je connais bien ces endroits. Donc en fait, ça aurait pu être nous tous, et c'est important en fait de se rendre compte de la chance qu'on a d'aujourd'hui être ici et de leur rendre hommage.
J'ai dit tout à l'heure, je suis venue déposer les fleurs pour rendre hommage aux victimes qui ont perdu la vie et c'est ma manière d'exprimer aussi ma solidarité et ma compassion envers leur famille. Voilà. C'est pour leur dire qu'on n'oublie pas cet événement qui nous a tous marqués et qu'on est à leur côté.
Et même si on ne connaît pas de gens directement qui étaient au Bataclan ou sur les terrasses des cafés, voilà, 10 ans après, la blessure, elle est toujours là. Mais après, on voit que la vie est plus forte que la mort et l'amour est plus fort que la haine. Donc voilà, c'est juste là, juste pour être avec tout le monde et être ensemble, c'est tout.
Quand même, combien 150 morts dans notre ville, Paris, dans nos quartiers. La 11e, moi j'habite le centre aussi, on pouvait être à leur place. Donc c'est extrêmement important d'être solidaire de ces gens-là. Et puis surtout, on est là aussi pour faire la différence entre islamistes, terroristes, assassins et la population musulmane avec qui on travaille. Moi j'étais professeur, donc j'ai eu beaucoup.
Now we move on to Africa. Hundreds of people in Tunisia's city of Gabes have protested outside a court today. As it considered a complaint to suspend a polluting factory, they said phosphate processing factory has been accused of causing widespread pollution, which locals claim has led to a rise in gas poisonings and other health issues. The court hearing, which addressed a complaint filed last month by the local bar association, was adjourned to next Thursday. The factory, which emits sulfur gases and other toxins, was audited back in July. It proceeded to produce a report that indicated major non-compliance with environmental standards. Now, protesters in Gabes have long demanded the closure of the factory, citing serious health and environmental damage. They point to rising cancers, bone issues, and shortness of breath, as well as loss of agricultural and sea resources. Let's in fact listen into what some of the protesters have shared.
اليوم قدمنا مؤيدات من أعداد المجمع فيها إقرار بالجريمة المرتكبة في حق الجهة. قدمنا خطاب رئيس الدولة اللي وصف الأمر بالجريمة في حق جهة جابس. ما عادش في حاجة إلى مؤيدات إضافية باش ندعموا بها موقفنا. اليوم المكلف العام بنزاهة الدولة طلب هو التأخير الاطلاع على المؤيدات اللي قدمناها المتمثلة في التقرير اللي أعد المجمع الكيميائي التونسي. من حقه باش يطلب تأخير، هذا حق دفاع، احنا كمحامين ما نجموش نعرضوه. تبقينا عرضنا في التأخير لأجل كبير باعتبار أن الخطر داهم، الخطر جاثم على أنفاس أولادنا.
اليوم قدام المحكمة الابتدائية في جابس لإسناد أئمة المحامين في القضية اللي تم رفعها من أجل إيقاف نشاط المجمع الكيميائي التونسي. المسألة من المفروض محسومة بتقرير التدقيق اللي تم نشره في موقع المجمع الكيميائي التونسي اللي يثبت بشكل حاسم وجازم أن كل الوحدات المجمع تخالف المعايير التونسية وتخالف القانون. اليوم نحبوا تطبيق القانون ونستنوا في القرار هذا اللي ينصف الأهالي بتاع جابس.
Now we move on to our next news. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has welcomed Germany's decision to introduce voluntary military service, calling it a positive step to strengthening defense. Speaking during a visit to German air base, Rutte has said that he was very happy to see more people getting involved in national defense, while noting recruitment remains each country's choice. Germany scrapped compulsory service in 2011, but now aims to boost troop numbers from 180,000 troops to 260,000 by the early 2030s, part of a wider effort to meet NATO targets and expand its military capacity. Let's in fact listen into what NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said.
And obviously the planes need to be replaced, that's clear, so that process is ongoing, and I will do everything to make sure that we speed up that process. It is important that we speed it up. I have the highest respect for all technicians working here within the whole AWACS mission to make sure that these planes fly safely. They are our ears and also, let's say, our eyes when it comes to protecting NATO airspace. So my all my admiration for them, but we want, of course, for them to have the latest technologies. And also, for that reason, I will do everything I can to speed up the decision making.
Now we move on to UK. British pro-Palestinian commentator has returned to the UK on November 13th after being detained by US immigration authorities for 2 weeks. For the commentator, who was in the middle of a speaking tour, he has had his visa revoked by US Homeland Security in October 26th and was to be deported. US officials stated that individuals supporting terrorism and undermining national security would be banned from working or visiting the country. Conservative figures had urged the Trump administration to expel the commentator, who has criticized Israeli actions in Gaza and supported Palestinian rights. Rights groups and press freedom advocates have condemned the detention, calling for his immediate release. Now we move on to our next news. The United Nations Migration Chief says Sudan's humanitarian crisis is worsening as funding shortfalls leave aid agencies unable to help thousands fleeing renewed violence in Darfur. Amy Pope says the some of the protesters have said on these issues. Now let's hear some protesters. Now we move on to Europe. Paris court has announced former French President Nicolas Sarkozy's appeal against his conviction for criminal conspiracy related to illegal Libyan financing for his 2007 presidential bid that will be heard from March 16th to June 3rd. Sarkozy, who was sentenced to 5 years in September, was allowed to leave jail this week after a court ruled he would not serve his sentence while appealing. In a message on X, Sarkozy wrote, "Truth will prevail. This is a fact that life teaches us." The conviction stems from accusations that Sarkozy conspired to secure funds from Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi for his successful 2007 campaign. His imprisonment marked a dramatic fall for the former president who led France from 2007 to 2012. Now we move on to our next news. Now we move on to our next news. Sudan. About Sudan, Amy Pope has said that International Organization for Migration has received less than 10% of its $229 million appeal, forcing it to halt most operations. The conflict between Sudan's army and the Rapid Support Forces, now in its 19th month, has displaced over 12 million people and pushed parts of the country towards famine. In Al-Fashar, tens of thousands have fled since the RSF seized control, with many trapped in areas and groups cannot reach due to fighting and insecurity. Pope has warned that the lack of aid driving repeated displacement, with many risking dangerous journeys towards Chad, Libya, and across the Mediterranean. Now we move on to Pakistan. Pakistan has deployed both army and paramilitary forces to protect Sri Lanka's cricket team following a deadly suicide bombing in Islamabad. The attack has raised security concerns during the team's ongoing tour. Let's hear what more has been said from Pakistan's Interior Minister.
लेकिन हमने कोशिश की कि वो सारे के सारे कंसर्न दूर करें। श्रीलंकन प्रेसिडेंट ने खुद उनसे बात की कल अपनी टीम के साथ और उनको कन्विंस करने की कोशिश की। हमारे फील्ड मार्शल ने खुद उनके डिफेंस मिनिस्टर से सेक्रेटरी से बात की और उनको कन्विंस किया और पूरा शोर कराया सिक्योरिटी के लिए। और अब पाकिस्तान आर्मी रेंजर्स और इस्लामाबाद पुलिस मिलकर उनकी सिक्योरिटी संभाले हुए है और जिस तरह वो हमारे स्टेट गेस्ट हैं उनको हम उसी तरह का प्रोटोकॉल दे रहे हैं, उसी तरह की सिक्योरिटी.
This comes as the Sri Lankan players expressed serious concerns about remaining on in Pakistan after the bombing. Now, the suicide bombing took place outside a court in Islamabad, killing 12 people and injuring 27 others. Now we move on to our next news. Parents in Colombia have carried wooden barge with photographs of hundreds of children reported missing 40 years ago when a volcanic eruption took place in Colombia. The disaster, which wiped out a town and killed around 25,000 people, also led to the disappearance of 583 children. Some were rescued and later adopted under irregular circumstances, with many now living abroad. Decades later, the woman still holds hope that her children survived. The foundation working to help survivors is collecting DNA samples in hopes of returning and reuniting families separated in the chaos of volcano. Now we move on to our next news. Spanish police has said that they have dismantled an international crime ring accused of trafficking minors from the Canary Islands to France, arresting 11 people in an operation that spanned Lanzarote, Madrid, and Las Palmas, Gran Canaria. The police statement reads 4 of the suspects have been placed in pre-trial detention on charges related to organized crime, document forgery, and child pornography. The investigation began after the disappearance of the 14 minors from state-run centers on the Canary Islands between late 2024 and mid-2025. Police said the group used routes and contacts in Morocco, Ivory Coast, and Spain to move the children and provide them with fake documents for their transfer to France. 2 homes were searched in Lanzarote, where officers seized personal documents, electronic devices, and cash. The investigation remains open to locate the missing minors and trace international links. Now moving on, Apple has refused permission to appeal against a London tribunal ruling that abused its dominant position by charging app developers unfair commissions, leaving the tech giant facing a potential bill of over $1.3 billion. The Competition Appeal Tribunal has ruled against Apple last month after a trial finding Apple had abused its dominant position by shutting out competition in the app distribution market and charging excessive and unfair prices. As commission, Apple, which has faced mounting pressure from regulators in the US and Europe over the fees it charges developers, has previously said that the ruling takes a flawed view of the thriving and competitive app economy. Refused Apple's permission to challenge its ruling at the Court of Appeal, but the company can still apply directly to the court. Lawyers representing Rachel Kent, the British academic who brought the case, said in court filings for the hearing that they had calculated damages from October 15 until February 2024, plus interest at £1.2 million. With that, it's a wrap. With that, it's a wrap on Newsroom.